link to this webinar. For those of you who are new to, there we go, to Wild Virginia, welcome. This is an outline of what we do at Wild Virginia. We are a state-based conservation nonprofit, and we have a couple of conservation programs and areas of focus. One of them, which we're going to be highlighting tonight, is habitat connectivity, but also kind of highlighted tonight is water quality. We have a PFAS campaign, a Mountain Valley Pipeline campaign, and we also have a Clean Water Advocates program. So please do check us out at wildvirginia.org to check out our specific programs. Okay, and now I'm going to switch PowerPoints. Give me 1 second and introduce our awesome speaker for tonight. There we go. Okay. Whoops. So our speaker tonight is Benjamin Bradley. He works with Trout Unlimited. He's also one of Wild Virginia's partners in a bunch of our legislative work and our work with state representatives and state agencies to build better infrastructure across the state of Virginia. That includes wildlife passage, so both aquatic and terrestrial, and flood resilience for our infrastructure. So we are so excited to have Benjamin here. And without further ado, go take it away, Benjamin. I'm going to share your presentation now. You're on mute, Ben.
Okay, there you go. Hi, everyone. Like Jess said, I'm Ben Bradley. I'm a stream restoration specialist with Trout Unlimited. And today we're going to be talking about stream simulation, ecological design approach to road stream crossings. Next slide. So just kind of cover what we're going to go over today. We start with a quick introduction to Trout Unlimited, and then we'll jump into what is a road stream crossing and the kind of traditional culvert design approach that a lot of engineers take at road stream crossings. And then we'll talk about how these culverts impact aquatic organisms, and finish up with talking about the stream simulation design approach and the benefits of that approach. Next slide. So just real quick, Trout Unlimited is a nationwide nonprofit. It's made up of over 400 chapters. I think we have 300,000 grassroots members. We also have about 300 staff, full-time staff nationwide. And all of us work together to protect, reconnect, restore, and sustain our cold water resources. Next slide. So road stream crossings. Today's webinar is all about road stream crossings. And, for those who don't know, a road stream crossing is exactly what the name sounds like. Anytime we have a road intersect a stream or a river, we get a road stream crossing. And a lot of times our roads sit pretty high up at road stream crossings. And so a lot of people don't even notice how many road stream crossings are out there. But once you start looking around for them, you'll notice that they're all over the place. And in this picture here, we have, you can see the road is going from left to right. The stream is going from top to bottom. And right where those two intersect, we get a culvert, to allow the stream to go underneath the road and the traffic to go over top the stream. The next slide. So this nice little map is a map provided by VDOT. Here in Virginia, VDOT has over 30,000 road stream crossings that they manage, and that's just VDOT. Those are all the blue dots on this map. That doesn't account for road stream crossings that are managed by other public agencies, such as DWR or localities like the county of Roanoke or Fairfax County, or road stream crossings that occur on private lands. So if we're thinking big picture in Virginia, there's probably over 50,000 road stream crossings. Next slide. And at every road stream crossing, you're going to find some type of structure, like we said before, that allows the traffic to go over top the stream and allows the stream to go underneath the roadway. One of the common structures that we see at road stream crossing is a bridge. And a lot of times we find bridges around larger streams or rivers. Next slide. Another type of common structure at road stream crossings is called a low water ford or a low water crossing. Typically, you'll see pretty much a concrete slab that goes just above the stream, or it'll even be the concrete slab will sit on the stream bottom, but it essentially lets traffic drive over the stream as long as it's in low water conditions. You'll see a lot of these on farm roads or really low volume private roads. Next slide. Then we get to our kind of most common type of structure that we see at road stream crossings, which is a culvert. Um, Culverts come in all different sizes and shapes and materials, but at the end of the day, they all serve the same function where they're a pipe that lets the water flow through the roadway embankment. Like I said, culverts are our most common type of structure that we see at road stream crossings. And they're also the most problematic, which is why the rest of today's talk is really going to focus on culverts. Next slide. But before we get into culvert design, I wanted to kind of introduce a couple of terms just to make sure we're all on the same page and I don't lose you guys with some engineering jargon. So if you click a couple times, Jess, since you're running this, I kind of regret my animations now, but if you click like 3 times, some little things will pop up. Go 2 more times. All right. So here in our picture, this is kind of a cross section of a culvert. And so you can imagine our stream is flowing from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen. And down at the bottom, we have our culvert pipe. And you can see our stream flows in to the inlet of the culvert. And then our stream will flow out of the pipe at the outlet of the culvert. And on top of the culvert, you'll have what we call the roadway embankment, which is essentially just a big pile of soil that, you kind of build up to get your road a little bit away from the stream. And then on top of your roadway embankment will be the road surface itself, which is either asphalt or gravel. But something I wanted to kind of highlight at this stage is at the inlet of our culverts, when we get a lot of water coming to them, we end up with this ponded condition at the inlet where not all the water can go through the culvert right away. And so the water starts to build up and we get almost a lake or a pond starting to form at the inlet of the culvert. And that'll kind of be something that we circle back to later on in the presentation. But here in Virginia, if you wanted to install a culvert at a road stream crossing, you'd have to work with an engineer to come up with a culvert design. Traditionally, to design a culvert, the engineer will figure out, all right, we get a big flood. This is how much water is coming to the culvert, and this is how much water that culvert will need to pass. And then the engineer will go through a series of calculations to figure out, okay, what is the smallest pipe that I can fit that volume of water into and not flood the roadway? And that's kind of it. That's the whole design problem, and it's pretty simple. We have a lot of good tools now that lets us figure out how much water is coming to the culvert. We have a lot of good tools that show us, this is how that water is going to interact in the culvert pipe and come out of the culvert pipe. It's a pretty simple design problem and something that every civil engineer coming out of college probably does a culvert design before they graduate. Next slide. Um, However, that traditional design approach doesn't really consider how a culvert is going to interact with the sediment that a stream moves during a flood. You know, when a stream or a river floods, it moves a lot of water, but it also transports sand, gravel, cobble, and even boulders. If you've seen some pictures coming out of Southwest Virginia after Hurricane Helene, you've probably been blown away at how much sediment a stream can move and even how big some of these boulders are that streams can move down the channel when they get enough water in them. And an example that I always like to kind of throw up whenever I do these presentations is a road stream crossing near my house. It's at a park, and so not a lot of traffic, but the engineer came up with, we need 3 culverts out here to pass our flood or our design flood that's going to come to the culvert. But what the engineer doesn't really think about in their design process is what's going to happen to the sediment that's moving in the stream during that flood. And you can see one of the culvert barrels is completely full of sediment. And so now we have a crossing that was designed for a certain flood, but now we can't convey that water anymore. And you can see that the roadway got overtopped and the stream started to cut around the crossing. And so we have a failed crossing now just because we didn't account for the sediment in the design of the crossing. Next slide. Um, and another thing that the traditional culvert design process doesn't look at is the ability of a stream to move wood. If you've ever seen a stream or a river flooding, you'll see, if you stand there and watch long enough, you'll see a branch come down the river. You might see a log, or you might see an entire tree, root wide, trunk and branches and everything. And typically, when that wood is moving down the stream channel, it's moving parallel to the flow. But when that wood gets to a culvert crossing that's having that ponded condition, like you can see in our little picture here, once that ponded condition happens, that wood turns from being parallel to the direction of flow to being perpendicular. And then suddenly it gets hung up. It's too wide now to go through the crossing. And our picture here on the right is a culvert that has accumulated a ton of woody debris at the inlet. And you might even think that looks like a beaver dam, but it's not a beaver dam. There's no beavers, in that watershed. And it's really behind all that is a 6-inch log that's just, a foot or two longer than the culvert. It got caught at the inlet, and over time, it's just continued to collect more and more debris. And kind of the number one thing that dooms culverts is that they get clogged. And once they get clogged, then they can no longer convey that flow underneath the road and bad things start to happen. Next slide. Our traditional culvert design approach also causes severe erosion at the outlet of the culvert. If you can think about, we're taking a ton of water during a flood and we're trying to shove it into a little pipe. And so what that does is it really speeds up the water inside the pipe. And so when that water comes out of the outlet of the culvert, it's going really fast, and it's going so fast that it starts to erode the stream banks, anything around the outlet of the culvert pipe. And so that can have a pretty big impact on water quality. Reducing sediment going into the Chesapeake Bay is a big thing in Virginia right now. Well, culverts send a ton of sediment downstream. And even when these culverts start to erode so bad at the outlet, they can really start to, compromise the structural integrity of the crossing itself. And what we found is when culverts and roadways fell, they fell in terrible ways. Like we think back to all that water being ponded up at the inlet of the culvert. Well, when that culvert gets clogged, that water has to go somewhere, and suddenly you have this big flood wave that goes downstream. And it's not even a flood that's happening at that point. It's almost like a dam is being breached, and you have way more water than what you traditionally would have moving in the channel released. And so it's even kind of comes back to, a public safety thing, having all these small pipes that really back up water during large floods. And then our next slide. The kind of the last thing that the traditional culvert process or design approach doesn't really account for is aquatic organisms. So, engineers are really focused on how is this culvert going to interact at a large flood event. They don't really think about how's the culvert going to interact with low flow conditions. Is the water in the pipe going to be moving a lot faster than what aquatic species would typically see? Is the water in the pipe going to be a lot shallower than what aquatic species would typically see? And so there's kind of this whole focus on what happens during major floods that we kind of forget that, hey, there's organisms that live in these streams and that move around and they move during low flow conditions. And so what is this pipe doing to the stream in low flow conditions? And that's something that, we kind of just forget about. I do want to kind of pause here real fast and say I'm trying to not throw out too many jargon terms or acronyms. There are a ton in this industry, but one that I might slip up on is AOP, and I might have already done it. But if I have, AOP stands for aquatic organism passage. And so just, sometimes you work in this industry long enough, you kind of forget that I'm just throwing out this short AOP instead of aquatic organism passage, but just wanted to offer that disclaimer before we get too far into the talk and people are thinking this guy keeps saying AOP and I have no clue what AOP is. Next slide. And then, yeah, go ahead and click two more times, Jess. Sorry, these animations are killing us. But anyway, whenever talking about aquatic organism passage, I always like to kind of bring it back to the organisms that we're really talking about. We don't want to just use this umbrella term about aquatic organisms, but I like to really, focus on the organisms that we're doing this work for. And some that we have here in Virginia that's kind of the almost a poster species for aquatic organism passage is shad and herring. The unique thing about shad and herring is they start their lives out in freshwater rivers and then they move to estuaries and then out to the saltwater in the ocean. And then once they're ready to spawn and reproduce again, they make their way back to freshwater rivers. And then kind of on the flip side of the coin, we have fish species that spend their whole lives in freshwater rivers, like the candy darter in the middle of the screen or the yellowfin mad tom just below the candy darter. And these are small native freshwater fish. They're both endangered species, but they're just kind of the local residents in the streams. And later on, I'll talk about species that are weak swimmers or they're not our athletic fish. Those are the candy darter and the yellowfin bad tom are the species that I'm referencing there. And then we also have species like the brook trout, who is in the top right. Working for Trout Unlimited, I have to, I'm obligated to mention the brook trout. It is a popular sport fish here in Virginia and is the state fish of Virginia as well. And then down below the brook trout, we have a black-nosed dace, just another common species. If you're fishing a stream with a brook trout in it, this probably has 10 times the amount of black-nosed dace in it as well. Next slide. But aquatic organism passage isn't all about fish. There's also other organisms that, we target and that these projects can really benefit. And one of them being the American eel. They're another species that moves from freshwater to saltwater, back to freshwater. We also have freshwater mussels. And then we have semi-aquatic species like turtles or salamanders or even crawdads who they can go out of the stream, but they do like to spend some time in the stream or around the stream as well. These projects can benefit all those species. Next slide. So all these different species, they all have different life cycles. They all require different habitats for different stages in their life. And once again, as a TU employee, we're going to kind of zoom in about on the brook trout and kind of focus on them. But it's important to remember that each of these species we've mentioned and all the ones we haven't, they all have specific things that they need during their life cycle and at different times. And so for the brook trout, they like to spawn in these small headwater mountain streams. And so really high up in the mountains, they'll spawn. And then once the eggs hatch, the fry, they might make their way downstream a little, see if they can find part of the stream that has more bugs in it, and so they can get bigger fish, or they can turn into a bigger fish, and then eventually they might make their way so far downstream that they enter what we would call a river, and they might spend some time in a river. They've gotten a little bigger, and maybe they want to eat something that's not a bug. Maybe they want to try to eat a crawdad, or they want to try to eat a candy darter or a black-nosed dace, and so they make their way downstream and see if they can find bigger prey to eat on. But then a lot of times in the summer, we notice that our larger rivers, the water temperature starts to increase. And so brook trout, they like cold water. They don't want to be in warmer water. If it's above 70 degrees, you're probably not going to find them there. And so they'll start, once those water temperatures start to increase, they'll start moving around and looking to find, maybe a spring-fed tributary, a little area where the water is going to be super cold and they can kind of take refuge in that area for the summer months. And then once they kind of hang out for the summertime, water temperatures start to go back down. Once the fall comes around, they're looking to spawn again. And so now they're going to move from their little spring-fed tributary and they're going to head back up to the mountains and try to get to those small headwater streams where they have really good spawning habitat. And we have a documentation that brook trout can move up to 75 miles in a given year in a watershed that is, totally connected. And so these fish, they're not just wanting to move a mile upstream or downstream. Like if the option is there, they're looking to move pretty large distances. And like I said before, this is just the brook trout. The candy darters are going to require different things. The shad, they might move hundreds to thousands of miles in their lifetime. And so they all have different requirements that they want to move. Next slide. But what we have found is that culverts can oftentimes turn into barriers for these aquatic organisms who are looking to move. And the culverts can kind of become barriers in a couple different ways. One way is a velocity barrier. So our first picture here in the top left, you can see water coming out of the outlet. It's moving pretty fast, a lot faster than the water in the stream. And, start thinking about that candy darter. Candy darter can move around in the stream, but he's not going to be able to move through that culvert barrel where the water might be going twice as fast as it is in the stream. Next picture. We can have culverts that become vertical barriers. Thinking back to those high velocities and all the erosion that occurs at the outlet of the culvert. Well, this culvert wasn't put in, 2 feet above the stream bed. This culvert was probably put in right at the stream bed, and then over time, the water coming out of the culvert has eroded the stream bed, and so now the culvert sits 2 feet above the stream bed. And thinking back to our candy darter, the candy darter is not making it into that pipe. Even a brook trout, brook trout can jump 12 inches. They're not going to be able to make it into that pipe if it's 2 feet above the stream bed. And so we can have culverts that become vertical barriers to species as well. And then next picture. And then the third kind of common barrier type that we see is the water's too shallow. You can see at the outlet of the culvert, we probably have water depths that are maybe 6 inches deep, but then you look into the culvert itself and you see that water is spread out across, maybe 20 feet, and the water is only an inch deep. Your fish is not going to be able to swim up through just an inch of water. They need water depths that match the stream. And then our last picture here is what we call the trifecta, and this is when we get all three conditions. We have a culvert, the water's too fast, water's too shallow, and the culvert has the vertical barrier component to it as well. There could be other barriers to fish, but these are kind of the three most common that we see a lot. Next slide. So, we've kind of already hit on it that these species naturally they want to move, or at least some of them want to move, and culverts can really impact that. And we've also hit on, as the species environmental factors change, such as water temperature, maybe that will drive the species to change. Some species don't like cold water, they want to be in warm water. And then some species like trout, they like the cold water. And so when the water gets too warm, they're going to start seeking out the colder water, and culverts can really impact their ability to move throughout the watershed and kind of find the habitats that they're looking for. Barriers also have a huge impact on genetic diversity. Species can become super isolated in tributaries that have barriers on them. And essentially the gene pool just gets inbred, and our species can start having one, they can be wiped out by disease. Two, they're not very sustainable gene pool long term. So we can see pretty big impacts from losing the genetic diversity that barriers can create. Um, and then thinking back, Hurricane Helene, Southwest Virginia just got hit by some massive floods. And guess what? When those floods hit, sometimes the fish can hide, but you can get, floods so big that the fish get pushed downstream. And a massive event like Helene, you can have, a lot of fish getting wiped out of sections of stream, and we can have sections of stream become, non-fish bearing anymore because all the fish got pushed downstream. Well, 200 years ago, no big deal. Those fish would just move back upstream once they got pushed out. But now that we have barriers from culverts all over the place, if the fish get pushed out and go downstream, they can't make it back upstream. And so now, we're seeing that we're losing species in certain streams because over time, just natural disasters are pushing them farther and farther downstream, and they can't make it back upstream. And natural dispersal is the same kind of a similar thing. A section of stream can just become overpopulated with species, and maybe they just want to move to get in an area where, their food source isn't under so much pressure, or they're not bumping into, their buddies all the time in the stream, and they just want to spread out, but barriers can really impact that. Um, and then the last two, recreational fisheries. If you want big fish, then you want fish to be able to move. They need to find food sources that can grow them to be bigger. And so if we want good recreational fisheries, we really need to restore, stream connectivity. And endangered species, the candy darter and the yellowfin bantam, two top causes. The reasons that they're endangered is one is stream barriers and two is sedimentation. And I would say for almost every aquatic endangered species, stream barriers is going to be at least, the top or the second reason that that species is now endangered. So if we're looking to recover, species and aquatic species, we really want to start looking at ways to remove barriers. Next slide. Um, so, we've been beating up on culverts pretty bad here, but just to kind of highlight, not every culvert starts out as a bad culvert. Here in Virginia, when culverts are installed, they must be countersunk 6 inches in the stream bed. And what that means is that they're installed 6 inches below the stream bed. And so they're dug in a little deeper, and then you fill them full of stream substrate. And so, you know, you would kind of walk away with that being like, okay, we're good to go. Species can make it through the culvert. But what we see once again, coming back to those higher velocities, is this picture on the right here. This culvert was countersunk 6 inches. 2 years later, when this picture was taken, all the stream substrate's gone, and you can see that we're getting that vertical height difference at the outlet of the culvert. And next picture. This is 2 years later. So in 2 years now, well, 4 years since this culvert was put in, we've lost all the substrate, and our culvert is now, 4 inch, I mean, probably about a 12-inch perch or 12-inch vertical drop at the outlet. And this culvert probably has, a 30-year lifespan, maybe a 50-year lifespan. So a culvert that was put in on day one with aquatic organism passage restored is now going to be a barrier for the next 26 years in its life. And no one's going to come out there to to replace that or fix that unless there's a major failure. Next slide. So obviously culverts are a big problem for aquatic organism passage, but the question is, how big of a problem is it? And organizations like Trout Unlimited, the James River Association, Piedmont Environmental Council, Rappahannock River Roundtable have all kind of teamed up and led road stream crossing survey efforts to see how many crossings are barriers. And what we have found is about a third of road stream crossings are complete barriers. Our candy darter, our yellowfin mad tom, they're not making it up. But even the athletic fish like a brook trout isn't making it up the culvert either. We found that about another third of the culverts are partial barriers. And so maybe an adult brook trout will be able to make it up through the culvert. But once again, our candy darter, maybe our black-nosed dace isn't going to be able to navigate that barrier. And then we found about 23% of crossings are not barriers. And a lot of times these are just bridges. A very small percentage of this not barrier group are actual culverts. Um, and I will say, there are more crossings in Virginia that have to be surveyed than there are crossings that have been surveyed. And so we're not saying that these are the numbers that will hold across Virginia, but we do have, 500 to maybe 700 crossings already surveyed. And so it wouldn't surprise me if, as we build out the survey database, if this distribution kind of stays similar. Next slide. All right. So hopefully we've kind of hammered home how big of an impact culverts can have on aquatic species and their ability to move throughout the watersheds. One of the first groups of folks to kind of realize the impact that culverts had is the Forest Service. And a lot of people don't realize it, but the Forest Service manages one of the largest networks of roads in the country, and they have a lot of experience with road stream crossings and culvert designs. Well, back in the 90s, some folks at the Forest Service realized the severe impacts that culverts can have. And so they started thinking about a way to come up with a new design approach to our road stream crossings. Next picture. And what they came up with is this stream simulation approach. It was an ecological approach for providing passage for aquatic organisms at road stream crossings. And they put together a whole design manual. It's, 500 pages long that kind of outlines this process of providing, an ecological approach to road stream crossings. But really the whole driver behind this stream simulation was the effects that culverts were having on aquatic organisms. And so it's just something to kind of keep, in your mind as we continue through our talk today. Next slide. Oh, and there's a nice stream sim culvert. Next slide, actually. Um, so one of the big things about the stream sim approach is it was kind of an approach to the way we view managing roads. When a lot of the Forest Service road network was put in, it was during a time when people wanted to build more and more crossings, more miles of roads. They wanted access to everything, and they weren't really considering the impacts that all these crossings would have on the landscape, and even, how are we going to maintain all these crossings 20, 30, 40 years down the road? So kind of when the Forest Service was putting together the Stream Sim manual, they wanted to really call out that, hey, before you jump into the design process, you really need to ask yourself, hey, do we need a crossing here? Do we really need access here? Or, before we just say we want to upgrade a crossing, do we even need this crossing anymore? And a good example of this is a project that the James River Association did with VDOT, where they were going to replace a culvert following the stream sim design process. But then once they asked around enough, they realized that, hey, no one actually uses this road. Like, this is a road to nowhere, essentially. And instead of replacing the culvert, they just removed the culvert and restored natural conditions. And so people always like to talk about the culverts, and you can click the next picture, Jess. It kind of shows the the nice JRA project here. But people always want to talk about the cool culvert crossings, but sometimes the best thing you can do is just remove the crossing, and normally that's a lot cheaper than putting in a new culvert. Next slide. But we can't always, remove the crossing or put the road somewhere else. Sometimes, we need to have a road stream crossing. And so that's where the Stream Sim manual really lays out, this new design approach, a new way to, come about designing road stream crossings. And like I said, the manual is really long. We're not going to go through all those steps today. We're going to kind of focus on these 4 rules of thumb that kind of give you a good overview of what is a stream sim crossing. Next slide. And the first rule of thumb is span the stream. And so here on the right, you can see this is a traditional culvert design. And you can see this culvert not only isn't even as wide as the water. I mean, it's definitely not as wide as the stream, but it's not even as wide as like base flow in the stream. It's a pretty tight pipe. And next picture. Here you can see we pull out the pipe, and this is what we're looking for when we're talking about span the stream. We don't want to span the wetted width of the stream. We want to span the wetted width and the stream banks. We want to put a whole stream bottom, stream banks, and maybe even a little bit of floodplain inside of our culvert pipes. Next slide. These next 2 rule of thumbs, I kind of lump them together because they're really about, are we putting in structures that kind of embrace the natural tendency of streams that we see where the stream wants to go in the landscape and we build a structure around it? Or are we putting in structures where we're trying to force a stream to do something, that it doesn't really want to do? And, if you work around streams and Mother Nature a lot, you'll know that it's only a matter of time before Mother Nature kind of imposes her will on us and she shows us this is what she really wants the stream to do. And so in this picture, you can see this culvert is really badly aligned with the stream. The stream is coming in at a really crazy angle. The reason they did this is they probably wanted the shorter culvert or the shortest culvert possible through the roadway. And so they're asking the stream to take kind of a pretty abrupt turn. And then our next picture here, oh yeah, our next picture here shows you even more that that kind of bad angle that the stream is coming in at. You can see maybe it's a 45-degree angle, maybe it's a 60-degree angle, but really we would like for there to be no angle there. We would like for the stream to hit the culvert, head on straight and not having to have this weird angle. Next picture. But then we have our stream sim solution, and you can see we have a nice bridge here that kind of spans the stream. The stream meanders its way through the bridge. You can see when they built the banks, they didn't try to straighten the stream out. They let the stream, take its meandering path through the structure. The water levels in the stream look like, a natural stream would. There's no crazy change in slope. There's no crazy turn in the stream alignment or anything. And this is really what we're looking for. Next slide. Our last rule of thumb is substrate in the crossing. This is probably the most important design element in a stream sim crossing, especially when you're talking about aquatic organism passage. You can see in the box culvert here, we have no substrate in the pipe. You can see that water's moving pretty fast, pretty shallow, and we have the vertical drop. Next picture. But once we start getting substrate in the pipes, you can see we're putting, big rock along the banks, and that's helping to keep the water depth, not super spread out and super shallow, but trying to concentrate it more in the center of the channel. And you can also see that we have a lot of substrate in the bottom of the channel as well. Next little animation. And so what that substrate really does is it helps to add flow diversity. Thinking back to that box culvert picture, water's just shooting through the pipe. It's super shallow, super fast. But here you can see we have our natural substrate in the channel or in the structure bottom. And you can see the center of the channel, we have faster moving flow. Next little squiggly. And then, but you can see on the, on kind of the outskirts of the channel, we have these slower areas where the water is not moving very fast. And it's kind of these rest areas. So when we're thinking about our candy darter who wants to move up this stream, like, yeah, maybe he can kind of shoot up through the channel in the fast water, but maybe he can only go 5 feet. But then he can rest in these like calmer, slower areas of water, and then he can shoot up and attack the next fast area when he's feeling good. He's not having to travel 40 feet up a pipe through fast flowing water. He gets to move through natural stream conditions. Next slide. And so real quick, I want to just run through a couple of different stream simulation projects, mainly to show you guys that I'm not a culvert salesman. I don't sell bottomless metal arches. I don't sell span bridges. It's not really about the structure that makes a roadway crossing a stream sim design. It's about having those four rules of thumb. Next picture. And so here you can see we have just classic two metal culverts in the before picture. Come in and replace it. We put in a 30-foot bottomless arch structure. This is a huge pipe. And now we have our natural stream flowing through the structure. We have our stream banks as well along the outside of the structure, kind of providing the dry passage for terrestrial organisms if they want to move through. Really changing the whole makeup of that crossing here. Next slide. And then you can do the next picture as well. And then here we have just another 3-barrel metal culvert. Pull that out and we put in a span bridge. Bridges are nice because we can stay high and dry above the stream channel and just have a natural stream channel down underneath the structure. We have our channel banks and we even have a little bit of floodplain area as well underneath the structure. Next slide. And you can click again too, Jess. There you go. And then here, another massive culvert, actually. This culvert's probably 12 feet wide, which is a pretty big culvert, but you can see it's still not big enough. The stream is kind of cutting around. We kind of have a braided channel, and the structure probably needs to be twice as wide to really span the stream. And so the after picture, you can see came in, put in a concrete bottomless arch. It's not a metal structure. This is a precast concrete structure. But at the end of the day, it serves the same purpose where we have that nice stream channel underneath the structure. We have a stream banks and we have that floodplain area. And we're letting the stream be a stream while keeping the road kind of outside of the stream itself. Next slide. And then these are two unique projects because I don't know if either of these projects were really done with stream simulation in mind. Both of them are in super urban areas. The one on the left is a crossing up in Fairfax County. And this crossing was probably put in before the stream sim manual was even written. But they put in a massive box culvert and they countersunk it 3, 5 feet maybe. And here you have a natural stream flowing through the structure. You have channel banks. We even got vegetation growing inside the structure, this is the first time I've ever seen vegetation growing inside the structure. And what's really cool at this site, you can see logs in the structure that are, the structure is moving wood through the system and those logs are still staying parallel to flow. They're not turning perpendicular and getting caught up on anything. And the picture on the right is a picture in the city of Roanoke. This crossing was put in probably for public safety because it's a greenway that follows the stream. And instead of making pedestrians go up and over the roadway, they just put in a really big crossing and send pedestrians underneath the roadway. But we have pretty much a stream sim approach, and they've probably never even heard of stream sim. But, like we have all the benefits of stream sim while protecting public safety as well. So just something kind of cool to point out that these projects exist that aren't even aquatic organism projects. Next slide. So you've probably picked up on that traditionally culverts are really small. Like I said before, engineers design it to be the smallest pipe possible. And you can see when you follow the stream sim approach, you end up with much larger structures. And so in the early 2000s, the Forest Service started putting in a lot of these stream sim structures, and some other localities as well started following the stream sim guidelines. And engineers and road managers started to notice that, hey, when these big storm events come, our crossings aren't getting blown out as much. We're not having to go out and maintain these stream sim pipes as much. We're not having to clean wood out of them and clean sediment out of them. And a good example of this is Hurricane Irene hit Vermont in August of 2011. Over 1,000 culverts and bridges damaged or completely wiped out, $733 million in damages. Next slide. But on the Green Mountain National Forest, they had actually upgraded a lot of their culverts before Hurricane Irene came. Just, kind of going about it in a strategic way to pretty much recover their trout resources that were on the forest. And after the hurricane came, they noticed that, hey, all of our stream sim culverts are still there. We don't have a bunch of debris sitting at the inlets. We don't have a bunch of sediment built up. The structures aren't compromised. The access to the forest was still maintained, but all their traditional design culverts, they were a mess. They had a lot of work to do to go back and fix those culverts. And so, this was kind of a story that, the early 2000s, people kind of attacked culverts following stream sim methodology. And then suddenly, and they were doing it a lot because of fish passage, aquatic organism passage. But then all the engineers started to realize that, hey, following this method gives us, a resilient infrastructure network. We're not having to go out and maintain these culverts and repair these culverts. And so like that's where the kind of driver behind StreamSim has shifted a little from being all about aquatic organism passage to more being about flood resilience and having resilient infrastructure. Next slide. So hopefully right now you are just super excited about StreamSim and you're kind of blown away and you're like, why isn't everyone doing this? You can click 3 times, Jess, if you want. And the reasons are, one, it's a relatively new approach. Engineers are tough people to work with, tough people to convince, and they like their traditional approaches because they are time tested. And so we have something new, and change just takes time to kind of get going. Another big reason is StreamSim goes above and beyond current design standards and regulations. When we go to VDOT and ask them to put in a stream sim design, they kind of look at us, side-eyed like, hey, is that a good use of taxpayer money? Because right now the regulations say we need to countersink a pipe 6 inches in the stream bed for aquatic organism passage, and we need to design it to this flood event. And so really agencies don't want to go above and beyond what they traditionally do if it's way beyond the standard, just because they have to be good stewards of our tax dollars. And the third reason is cost. Essentially we're putting in little bridges. Like these are not, a 12-inch pipe that you can go buy at Lowe's. These are little bridges, and so they do have a significantly higher upfront cost. Next slide. And even next slide. All right. But to kind of like counteract this cost argument, because cost is probably really the biggest hesitation. It's probably what we hear most from agencies about. And there's some studies that have come out that once you start looking at how these structures perform over time, you put in a metal pipe, and 10 years later, you have to put in another metal pipe, and maybe 5 years later, you have to send a crew to clean it out and fix it up. And then maybe 20 years later, you put in another metal pipe. Well, after you've done all that metal piping, you probably could have put in a stream sim project, and it actually would have been a cheaper cost. Next slide. One of my favorite cost studies is this one done by Massachusetts Department of Transportation, just because it really shows kind of the stubbornness of a DOT. So in 2004, the DOT repaired this crossing, and then a couple years later, their new crossing got wiped out during, I think, Hurricane Irene. And then they had to put in an emergency crossing that was even smaller pipes than the original design. So it's like, why would you even do that? But their smaller emergency crossing got wiped out as well. And all this happened in about a 5 or 6 year period. And by, eventually they were like, okay, we got to do something different here. They put in a stream sim culvert, $600,000. But if you kind of look on, their 6 year trajectory of spending $140,000 every 6 years to fix the culvert and to maintain the culvert, by the time this stream sim culvert needs to be replaced, they would have spent either $1 million or $2.4 million. And so at that point, you could put in two stream sim culverts and still probably save a little bit of money to what the DOT was trying to do at this crossing. Um, and so just as we kind of wrap up here, next slide. Um, and you can click like 7 times, Jess. um, the benefits of StreamSim is a lot of the cost benefit analysis has been focused on reduced maintenance costs and longer structure lifespan. But even when you start looking at these cost benefit analysis, if you start looking at, we're reducing public risk because we have all these essentially dams that when it floods, they could give away and cause, severe flooding that was 2 times as much flooding as what would be occurring naturally in the river. When you start looking at the benefits from having resilient infrastructure that can kind of adjust to a stream that, we have a changing climate right now. And so our streams are starting to adjust to that changing climate. But a traditional culvert pipe doesn't really give a lot of room for adjustment, but a stream sim structure does. And then you start looking at aquatic and terrestrial passage. If you started factoring in money that can be saved to, taxpayers by not getting in accidents with deer, not hitting wildlife, the cost benefit probably swings way to the benefit side of these structures, and it's probably not even close anymore. And then if you want to dig even deeper, you can start looking at, improving recreational fisheries and benefits to the regional economy that people come, you want to catch a 20-inch brook trout, you need to have a connected watershed. And so people, if we get 20-inch brook trout in Virginia, people are going to start coming from all over to catch those big fish. But the only way to get there is to really start removing these barriers. So last slide here, Jess. So the real question to me is how can we afford not to embrace stream simulation? We get a lot of pushback from all types of road managers and engineers, but when you start looking at all these benefits, they really add up. And, it's kind of hard to ignore all the benefits that you get from a stream sim design. And then last slide is just closing, just a question slide.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We're already getting people in the chat saying great presentation and they've learned so much. So this was just such a great presentation. And just to emphasize the terrestrial passage part, that's where our collaboration comes in with Ben is over the past couple of months, we have been collaborating on legislation for Virginia to have our state agencies put in this infrastructure whenever they're doing road projects for both terrestrial and aquatic passage and flood resilience. So stay tuned. We're going to be working on that again this year. All right, let's to get into questions just so we don't go too much over time. Okay. First question. Let's see here. Are there certain geographical or other qualifications that designate certain road stream crossings to fall under the jurisdiction of different agencies like VDOT versus DWR, as you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, I mean, it's really all about who manages the road. And so like, DWR manages their wildlife refuges. And so they have networks of road in those wildlife refuge that have culverts. And so, those culvert crossings are going to be under DWR. The Forest Service, they have their, area of roads that they manage and own. And so any culvert on Forest Service land falls under Forest Service management, and the same for VDOT. And not every paved road crossing is a VDOT crossing. A lot of crossings can be owned by, that local locality, whether it's the county or the city. And then you can even have private crossings. So it really, yeah, it's all about who owns the road is who's going to be responsible for the crossing. And really, I mean, when you look at it in Virginia, there's probably, if you exclude private landowners, there's probably over 200, 300 road managers in Virginia. So there's a lot of people to kind of get this message out to them. And then the private lands thing is a whole monster to tackle in itself as well.
Yes, yeah. And there are a lot of resources online like Virginia roads where you can go and you can check like where a particular road.
Mhm.
Right. Okay, let's see. Next one. Are culverts generally designed with high water, say with spring rains or a single heavy rain event, and say perhaps 20+%? So I think that means like are culverts designed with like flood plain management in mind?
Yeah, so yeah, not to go too far down like the engineering rabbit hole here, but yeah, like there is a standard for, if this is a culvert that's on an interstate, then we have to design it to the 100-year flood or maybe even the 500-year flood. And if this is a culvert that, is on what we call a secondary road, maybe we only design it to the 10-year flood event. And so there's different like design standards that you use to come up with, what is the design flood for this culvert based on, what the traffic volume is and who owns it. And different agencies will even have different flood design standards as well. And so it's all about what those existing design standards is, and that's what the culvert is going to get designed to.
Awesome, thank you. This is a really good one. What is the effect on mussels from culverts, especially with ponding? Does ponding only occur with major rain events slash spring rains? That's a great question.
Yeah, so the effect on muscles is probably a two-part. One, muscles don't really move a lot. So like muscle passage isn't a big deal, but if you have muscles downstream of a culvert, maybe within 100 feet, 200 feet, they're going to be subjected to those really high water velocities. And so you might have a high quality muscle bed downstream of a culvert, but after a while, that muscle bed is going to get eroded away and you're going to lose that high quality muscle habitat. The second big thing for mussels is that they require fish species to essentially to like repopulate. Like they spray their eggs into a fish's gills, and those eggs will like hang out on the fish's gills for a certain amount of time before falling off, into the stream bed and becoming a mussel. And so if fish aren't able to move up and down a stream, then those mussels aren't able to continue to like repopulate an area. And so thinking back to natural disasters, if mussels get washed downstream and the fish have some barrier that can't get them upstream, then we're going to lose the mussels in that section of the stream because the host species can't make it back upstream.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Thank you. I think we're over time, but I'm gonna do one more question. And is it okay if folks use your email to answer or to email you with any questions that we don't answer?
Oh yeah, yeah. I was going to kind of close with that. I do have my
Okay,
email
great,
up here, so if you have any
great,
questions about culverts or culvert design, feel free to reach out.
great. Because there are some final questions on here that are very good, and I want them to have the opportunity to be able to ask you. So that's really great. One final question. To your knowledge, are these stream simulation design methods being implemented in the rebuild efforts following Hurricane Helene? I don't know if you know.
Um, Good question, and probably not at the level that we want to. Unfortunately, when natural disasters happen, it's a knee-jerk response to get everything put back together. And, there are organizations like Trout Unlimited or Wild Virginia, we're advocating for responsible, build back strategies. But a lot of times, those kind of suggestions are kind of overlooked and they're just putting back what was there before. And so, that's where you start looking at that cost benefit. analysis, and it's like, hey, what you put back before didn't work. Why wouldn't we go ahead and, build something sustainable long term? But it's really hard to get that message across, especially, right after a natural disaster.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Great question. And so sorry to the rest of you who we weren't able to answer your questions right now, but please do feel free to email me at jessica@wildvirginia.org or Ben with any of your questions. Thank you so much for being here tonight. This was such a great presentation. Thank you to Ben. I definitely recommend looking in the chat. There's so many people who are saying this was just such a phenomenal presentation, and we agree. So that's it for tonight. Thank you so much for being here. And Kylie, you can stop the recording. Thank you.